We are Talk Central, Talk City, 91.1 FM. Your address for talk.
It's time for Global Africa Today. Stories about Africans from around the world.
It's just about 8 o'clock here on Talk City 91.1 FM. It gives me great pleasure to welcome once again the crew from the Indaba report here and the Emancipation Support Committee. And without further ado, because I know they have another packed program coming your way with another wonderful report coming up. And of course, we have some special guests lined up as well. So without further ado, let me welcome Shabaka Kambon, of course, Reverend Kwame Kamau, and Dr. Fergus. Gentlemen, and your special guests, good evening once again.
Yeah, good evening, Rustin. Nice to see you back with us. I hope you enjoyed your holiday, if that's where you were. Welcome once again to all our Indaba fans, wherever they may be. We do have a global audience. But if you're new to the program, welcome to the show. We are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. And of course, we are live on Talk City 91.1 FM. This program is being recorded and will be archived on the YouTube account of the Emancipation Support Committee. So you can tell your friends, and of course, as my brother Kwame would perhaps remind you towards the end, I'm asking you now, please subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and you are...
Oh, we lost Dr. Fergus there for a brief moment, but again, a very pleasant good evening to each and every one of you. Go ahead, Dr. Fergus.
Yes, first of all, we have a report from Ms. Renee Francois, who was a co-host last week. She'll be back, but for this evening, of course, Renee works with the Emancipation Support Committee. For this evening, she is going to tell us about the upcoming Global Africa People to People Forum that's coming up soon. And next, we will have the Africa Report. This week, we're looking at the Democratic Republic of Congo and its critical role in the supply chain of smart technologies, but also the price that it is paying in terms of the heavy cost of human suffering. Our feature discussion this evening, and that would take us to the end of the program, and this would be on a most important topic concerning all people of African descent, and that is a proposal for a second decade for people of African descent. We have some distinguished guests, and we would be introducing them closer to that particular segment. We have two very distinguished guests on this evening's program. So, my brother Kwame, can you just bring greetings before we bring up our sister, Renee? I'm sure you would like to greet the audience.
Oh, sure. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. Again, a very pleasant good evening to each and everyone listening. And on tonight, our audiences all across the world, a special good evening to you. Those in the Pacific Standard Time, it's only now 5 p.m. I want to greet our Oregon community, our Nevada community tuning in on tonight. Also, of course, want to greet those who are coming in by way of GMT time, our Liberia community, our Ghana community, our Togo community, Princess Aina out of our Burkina Faso community. Those who are in GMT1, the Nigeria Democratic Republic of the Congo. As a matter of fact, as irony of ironies, Dr. Fergus, I was talking to the king and queen out of DRC on today, and some of the very topics that you are going to be broaching on tonight were part and parcel of our discourse. So it's going to be very interesting to see how you unpack that. We anticipate their presence on tonight. But again, those from North, South, East, West, South Africa, those in the diaspora, we greet you. We say Akwaba, Bevakasha, Dayo. Baete. Welcome to Indaba. Over to you, Dr. Fergus.
Yes, great. And at this time, let us hear from our sister, Renee. Renee, could you please bring us that report? Tell us what's going on.
Hi, good
Global
night,
Africa
everyone.
Report.
Yes,
Go
hi,
ahead,
good night,
Renee.
everyone. I'm just here to share some brief information about a conference that ESC and the Caribbean Pan African Network has been working on for a long time with the African Union ECOSOC. It's our annual Global Africa People to People Forum. It's scheduled to take place on the Thursday, the 12th of September via Zoom. We are going to stream it live on ESC's YouTube page, CPAN's Facebook page, and Emancipation's Facebook page. Yeah, we just want to welcome everybody to take part in the discussion. One of the things we would have adopted very, I wouldn't say too recently, but about 2 or 3 conferences ago, is that we had people who were versed in their specific fields, but because we really understand that the youth are our future, of course, we started to engage the younger generation to kind of respond and share their own ideas as part of these panel discussions. So I just want to encourage everyone to please tune in to CPAN's Facebook page, ASC's Facebook page. If you receive emails and WhatsApp messages from us, you're going to get some information about how to join and who are the expected speakers. Yeah.
Okay, Renee, I know that's all you came on to do, but I'm going to ask you to just give an alert to the schools since you're there. Give an alert to the schools with respect to the upcoming African History Month activities. Just an alert.
Right. So yes, this is a project that we at ESC, the staff, are very, very excited about. We are starting our preparation for the African History Quiz and the National Spoken Word Competition. We're currently doing the research, compiling the information, fact checking the information for the booklets for the National African History Quiz. For those of you who don't know, this quiz is really geared towards secondary school children. It's Republic Bank, Power to Make a Difference program is one of the bigger sponsors. It's carried not live. It's carried on television on TTT. Anticipate that will be the case this year, but again, stay tuned for the information. And it's a really exciting competition. I must say, it really is exciting competition. These schools are competing for the Dr. Olabisi Challenge Trophy. Um, yeah, and it's nice to see the children engage with the information, enjoy the learning process, enjoy develop this really nice, healthy, competitive spirit. They're not, when they lose or things don't go their way, they still move with it very gracefully. And I by no means do I want people to think that we are omitting the younger ones. So we do have the National Spoken Word Competition. Um, the registration for that has ended because we do that at a regional level. Here we look at the different school districts in Trinidad and Tobago, and then we break it down to the national level where we have, I think, 25 students or so advancing to the national competition. And that also is really interesting competition and dynamic, seeing such young children engage with these really old but still very much relevant calypsos. I always enjoy seeing how they interpret it, how they present it, and how their presentation and performance grows as the competition goes on.
Thank you very much, Renee. So the spoken word and African history quiz. And
Yes.
of course, it is usually televised during a certain stage of proceedings, and I believe it's from the quarterfinals, where
Yes.
the program is recorded and shown the following week. So students can see themselves in action in competition and intense rivalry among the schools, definitely. So we are looking forward to that, and And we thank you. And we know you are not leaving us. You are behind the controls. So
Yes, I am.
bring up the Africa report for us. Let's delve into it right away and keep the program rolling. Thank you very much, Shanrini. Bring up the Africa report.
Always a pleasure.
And is found everywhere in the east of Congo. But the story of men in Colton, grey gold, is tragic. The front line of war closely follows the road of the Colton mines.
The Congo Basin is blessed with the world's third greatest abundance of resources needed to drive modern technology. But the region has also been cursed by predatory capitalism for hundreds of years. Consider, for example, at the dawn of modern capitalism, European transatlantic traffickers in African bodies seized more captives from the Congo than any other region of Africa. At the dawn of the age of electrical wires, telegraphs, pneumatic tires, and rubber boots, Belgium unleashed unspeakable horrors upon the Congolese people to satisfy the European and American demand for natural rubber and copper. And here once more, the dawn of digital technologies has imposed new burdens on the descendants of the survivors of the earlier crimes in order to procure tantalum, also called coltan in its raw state, which is the most indispensable material in smart technology. This week's Africa report is titled Smart Technology, Smart Men, and the Exploitation of the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. Smart technology is a universal reference to a range of modern digital technologies. Listen to a sample of smart technology applications.
Coltan is transformed into tantalum in blast furnaces, thus becoming a precious metal which is used to make the capacitors used by all the electronics industry. It is found everywhere in our everyday objects: microchips, laptops, PCs, mobile phones, GPS systems, calculators, television screens, cameras, game stations, surgical equipment, dentures, aircraft jet engines, satellites, and in all miniaturized electronic applications.
Coltan is also indispensable to modern weapons of war, and so the Congo finds itself the playground for rivals of global power. Their desire to maintain ridiculously low prices at the source of the minerals fuel never-ending conflicts in the region, to the extent that these highly sought-after materials are called conflict minerals. This edition of the Africa Report will focus exclusively on smartphones, the world's leading brands being Apple, Samsung, LG, Huawei, Sony, and Nokia, which is owned by Microsoft. I use the expression smart men in a conventional sense to refer to brilliant entrepreneurs and pioneers of smart technology. I also use it colloquially to refer to the heartless conmen who rob their victims of their dignity and wealth, while using sympathetic language to hide the fact that they are actually responsible for the victim's condition. Oftentimes, the pioneers, entrepreneurs, and conmen are one and the same. Currently, smartphones and all other modern technological devices depend on tantalum, or coltan. Some call it grey gold. Tantalum is used to create microchips and the heat-resistant capacitors in smartphones. 80% of the world's tantalum is produced in Africa. The DRC alone contains 40% of the world's known reserves. The Kivu provinces in eastern DRC, extending into Rwanda, contain most of Africa's known reserves of this mineral. Because coltan mining does not require specialized technologies, it is ideal for artisanal miners. In eastern Congo alone, over 2 million miners operate. This situation, however, makes the industry more susceptible to control by criminal enterprises, including smugglers and their principals from every continent. In 2001, the United Nations, led by Kofi Annan as Secretary General, voted for a total embargo on coltan. The preamble to the declaration read in part, "All the industries that use coltan should recognize that there is, without any doubt, a direct link between illegal coltan mining and the conflict in the Congo." Since 2001, however, the demand for coltan has increased exponentially, with no improvement in the conditions of artisanal miners who dominate its production. The rapid expansion of smart technology during the last decade is fueling a frenzied demand for coltan. In April 2023, Canada Rare Earth Corporation, a multinational company, began mining coltan in Kivu. By mid-2024, the company ramped up its production from 100 to 500 metric tons per month. In declaring its commitment to corporate responsibility, the Canadian firm claimed that it is dedicated to delivering economic and social benefits to the local community, and that a portion of sales revenue will be allocated to fund social development initiatives, fostering positive change in the region. To date, there is no evidence of change in the conditions of miners in Kivu. The following narrative and images, including previous ones, are not an indictment of Canada Rare Earth, but an indictment of predatory capitalists on a whole. Death and serious injuries stalk the miners of Kivu every day. Pits are narrow and deep, up to 50 meters deep. Temperatures within are high, up to 40 degrees Celsius. Oxygen is low. Listen to the difficulty miners have to breathe from 30 meters down. Yet they work for 12 hours per day for a paltry wage of about 5.5 euros per day. A 40-kilogram bag of coltan fetches 600 euros at mining sites, but a whopping 3,500 euros in foreign international markets. It's a smuggler's dream. Wooden staves support the shafts, but these are not engineered to withstand the weight of the mounting above, and the many shafts often cave in and become the permanent graves of many miners. The only hospital in the district is filled mainly with victims of tantalum mining. Unlike the mines in Rubaya, the coltan shafts worked by Silansimba villagers do not have wooden support, but they also extend to 50 meters, or 150 feet into the bowels of the earth. They appear to be better constructed, but breathing is also difficult, and the risk of cavings is also present. On average, a shaft in Silansimba produces 200 bags of coltan, or 30 tons per day. That's an extremely high level of productivity for work conducted manually. But the monetary rewards to the miners do not rise above starvation wages at $1 per day. Such servile wages and hazardous working conditions do not easily distress evil capitalist spirits, some of which incarnate as philanthropists in many African countries. Consider, for example, Bill Gates, the genius behind the Microsoft brand and co-founder of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. At a media event for the foundation in 2013, investigative journalists asked Gates if he knew of children miners and others who died every month in Rubaya to procure tantalum for Nokia phones. He dodged the question by saying that he was no longer working at Microsoft. When told that he was still on the board of directors and still owned 330 million shares, he seemed too stunned to answer and was spirited away by his media staff. Around the same time, Samsung's vice president, Jean-Daniel Haïm, boasted publicly that Samsung was all about improving human lives. However, when the same journalists cornered him, he also dodged answering about the black lives lost and maimed at Rumaya procuring tantalum for Samsung. It goes without saying that Tim Cook's Apple modules are all dependent on tantalum, much of which is sourced from Congo. In 2019, a federal appeals court in the United States dismissed a case against Google, Telsa, Apple, and other tech companies for using child labor in Congo. In April 2024, the government of the DRC hired French and American lawyers to take Tim Cook's Apple Corporation to court for conniving in the smuggling of tantalum and other rare earths used in its devices, and thus contributing to the human tragedy in Congo. The letter, read in part by an anchor in First Post Africa, is as follows.
It has become clear to us that year after year, Apple has sold technology made with minerals sourced from a region whose population is being devastated by grave violations of human rights. The iPhones, Mac computers, and accessories that Apple sells to its customers around the world rely on supply chains that are too opaque and that are tainted by the blood of the Congolese people, unquote.
As tough as the challenges are, If Africans are to benefit from the bounties that nature has gifted them, African governments individually and the African Union collectively must meet these challenges head on. Otherwise, Africans will forever be servants and sellouts to global capital in their own continent.
There you have it. That's the Africa report. Preparing some of these reports could be emotional sometimes, but sometimes you have to confront the reality. I'm sure people have heard the term blood diamonds with respect to, I think it was Sierra Leone and those places in the Gambia region. This is blood coltan or blood tantalum. Now, these mines are really super endowed with minerals, not just coltan. You might have noticed some blue rocks, some white rocks. Those are minerals. Some of them are cobalt, some are copper, iron, and so on. And the miners know all of them. The local miners know all of them. They just focus on the tantalum. But, I wondered when I'm doing this, the amount of wealth that is also, lost in the process of mining. So there needs to be some kind of governmental control over the thing so that they can maximize the benefits that are stored in those mines, because you have a whole host of minerals. They said some of the richest iron you can find in those mines, but they're not mining them, So your comment before we welcome our guest, brief comment.
Sure. Well, first of all, again,
and of course we will invite our guests after we introduce them to comment as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to start off by congratulating you on yet another scintillating edition, dynamic edition of the Africa Report. Tantalum is indeed quite a tantalizing topic, all puns intended. But in this case, of course, very, very tragic. One of the things that we know is that the ongoing war in the DRC, with a number of proxies fighting in that war in Eastern DRC, is really led by, encouraged by the abundance of riches that is to be found in Eastern region of DRC. And of course, these high-tech resources, extraction resources, are really at the heart and front and center. One of the questions that I have, and perhaps we can address it in the next feature, and while we are at it, perhaps with your leave, Dr. Fergus, I can go ahead and welcome and introduce our special.
Indeed. Yes,
beautiful.
Please.
Thank you so much. So in this segment, we are going right into the issue of the proposed second decade for people of African descent. In this particular segment, the rationale is that there is a proposed second decade for people of African descent, and this provides for the opportunity for Pan-African and international community stakeholders to further implement the program activities outlined in the first decade and focus on the issues of decolonization and reparations. Of course, in the first decade, the themes were recognition, development, and justice. Among other things, on tonight, we want to discuss the issue that the Permanent Forum can play in improving implementation of activities, as it were, in the second decade. And there we also want to discuss perhaps other issues in relation to intersectionality, the role of government, the role of the AU, among other things. To talk about this very important topic, we have a star-studded cast on tonight, and I was joking a little earlier because my wife is only 1 inch shorter than I. And I was saying that when in the presence of these magnanimous stalwarts of Pan-Africanism, I always grow 2 inches taller with any one of them in the room. So tonight I feel 4 inches taller. That means that my wife can wear 4-inch heels easily and get away with it on a night like tonight. I want to introduce to some and present to others the Honorable Ambassador, Dr. June Soomer. Dr. Soomer currently serves as the chair designate of the United Nations Permanent Forum of People of African Descent and a member of the St. Lucia Reparations Committee. Dr. Soomer also has served as St. Lucian Plenipotentiary Ambassador to CARICOM and the OECS, with responsibility for diaspora affairs as OECS Commissioner, and was the Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States, ACS, St. Lucian's ambassador to the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and CARICOM, with responsibility for diaspora affairs. I did say stalwarts, a position she held from 2008 to 2016. She was also, Dr. the Honorable, also ratified as the Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States. She previously, again, Dr. Soomer, worked for 10 years at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank in the Human Resources Department, the Research Department, and the Strategic Policy Unit. Not to be undone, we have as well, as part of our very star-studded cast of special guests on tonight, the effervescent and very dynamic, and I must say, a very down-to-earth and honest Professor Gaynel Curry. You really held your own the last time you were here. We sent you some curveballs and you really responded well. Professor Gaynel Curry, the Bahamas, is an adjunct faculty member at the University of the Bahamas. She has worked on human rights with the United Nations for more than 23 years. Ms. Curry has served, pardon me, as the Gender and Women's Affairs Rights Advisor at, of course, the OHCHR at New York. She also oversaw work on the International Decade for People of African Descent, hurrah, building on assignments in follow-up to the Durban Declaration and Program of Action to End Racism and Promote the Rights of People of African Descent. So that took a mouthful to get through, but I'm so happy that I did, because we could not rob the audience of the depth and the scope of, again, the magnanimous stalwarts of Pan-Africanism that is here on tonight. My first question, since I have the mic.
Before you start the question, I just want to say that the capacity in which I first knew Dr. Soomer was that of a historian. But I just want to add a little bit. You know, Dr. Soomer, I think that is missed out from her bio. As far as I knew, I only knew her in the 90s as a historian, and my first entree into cricket history was reading her work on history of cricket in St. Lucia as well. So she made a contribution to my own writing, especially in terms of West Indian cricket, as it is still called West Indies cricket or Caribbean cricket. So I just wanted to throw in that little bit. And of course, welcome, Brother Shabaka. He sneaked in on us there. I almost didn't know the thing. Welcome. Yeah, so proceed, Kwame. Go ahead with the first question you have.
Dr. Fergus, let me just say that I find it odd that you are talking about Dr. Soomer as if she's some mentor when she looks younger than you. What's going on here?
Well, you know, different people make an entry into a discipline at different times. So in terms of cricket history, yes, Professor Beckers, June Soomer, the whole set of them that were writing prodigiously in the 90s, late 80s and 90s. She was one of them. You know, cricket is a very dynamic field to be writing about. Anybody who has entered there would tell you it's more than cricket. You know, as Sheila Jane said, it's beyond a boundary. It's much more than that.
Well
yes,
put.
So go ahead, Kwame. Go ahead.
Thank you so very much. And again, welcome to you, Brother Shabaka. I'm sure you're going to add a lot of dynamism to tonight's discussion. Let me get the ball rolling. As we are using cricket terms, I don't know who is going to remove the shine from the ball, this first salvo that I'm about to bowl here. But for all intents and purposes, we are talking about that really grievous, heinous atrocity of smart technology meets smart men of all kinds within, a conundrum of capitalism gone crazy. Sorry for butchering your title, but I tend to be creative. And so we are seeing that there are all kinds of atrocities taking place within not only the DRC, but throughout Africa, as they engage in a rape of minerals, and a destruction of the flora and fauna in the process, and certainly the destruction of human life. We see villages being decimated as part and parcel of the work of the proposed second decade for people of African descent. What do you believe, if any, could be the role of such a decade, and more specifically, the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, in terms of addressing these issues, especially, and I want to add this little curveball, especially insofar as international courts, based on jurisdictional issues, based on the fact that some of the persons who are guilty of some of these crimes, I cough twice, some of the greatest funders of the UN, in a conundrum like that, jurisdictional issues, some of them who are guilty of these things are big, big funders of the UN. What is the way forward? What does justice look like in this scenario? And the question is it going to be seen anytime soon, whether at the end of this decade or perhaps in the second decade for people of African descent? Perhaps I can kick it off to the historian on tonight, Dr. June Soomer. Perhaps you may want to take that first salvo to remove the shine off of our ball on tonight.
Thank you very much. I accept your challenge, especially because Gaynel knows nothing about cricket. So she doesn't even know what you mean by taking the shine off the ball.
Thank you so much. I was politely listening, but thank you for outing me like that. But yes, thank you.
Since some of my cricket mentors are fast bowlers, and I still believe that Malcolm Marshall was the best fast bowler that we produced, followed by Curtly Ambrose, and the others, fall in line, and they were all fantastic and great men. You have opened the batting with quite a few questions. You spoke first to the issue of technological justice, which is one of the things that the Permanent Forum has a focus on, because you did not even mention AI yet. And for us, technological justice is one of the many dimensions of justice that the Permanent Forum is looking at. We look at the reparatory justice things you also included there, but we are also looking at that specific one because, as you said, let me go back to how you started with the film that was shown. I mean, the presentation on the Congo and so on. It starts, of course, with a mindset which says that we must extract as much as possible from these countries. They still see these countries as colonies. Even if some of them are independent, they move in their capitalism does not recognize a term called decolonization. Does not. So the important thing is as much extraction as possible to build the wealth of other people, whether it is in Europe, and of course, a lot of multinational corporations that don't have borders, that we don't ever examine, because our attack is really against countries. So we never, within our work, and you rightfully pointed it out, that we do not look at those people who operate across all of these various colonialisms, because capitalism is their main driver. And they continue not only with extraction of our resources, but denying us, in the process, denying us our humanity and making us even more invisible because they are not recognizing those people who work in these mines as human beings. Neither are they even seeing them. All they see is the wealth that they are extracting. So the permanent forum, quite apart from dealing with the issues around colonialism and decolonization, around the issues related to um, technological justice, because they extract these things and they pretend that we do not have the brains to use them, um, and denying us the ability to also develop these industries and participate in them. But they are also doing some other things with regard to our biodiversity, and they don't recognize our biodiversity. So that you have international conventions, like the Montreal Accord, etc., that speaks to the biodiversity of the world and indigenous people and so on, and never recognizes that we as people of African descent have the most biodiversity in the world, because they want to continue with their extraction and not give us credit for what is ours. They don't give us credit for innovations, for our development of ideas, etc. So you came with a very good opening stance. I'm happy to bowl the first fastball. I have a Fugu Louise also. I can go there. So I leave it.
Yes, I don't know if Dr. Janelle would want to respond, but I want to shift it more directly to the permanent forum and the second decade. I recognize that's a nice transition from the previous segment into this one. I recognize that. I appreciate it. But we need to consider a sort of review. The decade is almost over. The door is about to close on that decade. So, in terms of a sort of a general but brief review, were there any things coming out in the decade to shout about in terms of achievements? Because we tend to think that nothing was achieved, but you know, were there any things at all that we could shout about? Was the year of return that Ghana sponsored connected directly to the decade, or was it simply coincidental? So one is a review. What were the main achievements, if any? And secondly, what role does the permanent forum anticipate playing to ensure that if there is a new decade, that a new decade would be much more productive in terms of outcomes than the first decade? And therefore, what was really missing to, in a sense, achieve something significant in that first decade? Because we keep blaming governments, but is that all? Was there something else fundamental that was missing that could, in a sense, push the buttons where it mattered to ensure that something was done, that governments were more receptive?
You want me to start answering?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I would.
Gaynel could probably take the first shot this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. And I often reflect on this decade, and I do have something. I think we do have something to cheer about. That's the permanent forum. That finally was established and set up and is running for 3 years now. This is our third year, and it happened during the decade. So I think that's one good thing to celebrate. We also have another mechanism that was set up within the UN mechanism to look at policing, and that brings me to the point that what was missing really at the start of this decade, in my view, was political will, and a real genuine interest in doing something to change the lives of people of African descent. Because when I think about this 10 years, I also think about what was happening during the Sustainable Development Goal discussions, sort of the lack of focus on people of African descent within that agenda, the 2030 agenda as well. I think what really got the push for us on people of African descent was the unfortunate killing of George Floyd. That with millions of people coming onto the streets around the world, I think there was this urgency within the UN system. What can we do? How can we move? And I think you saw a movement around the mechanism that dealt with policing, and certainly the mechanism, our mechanism, which is really on the rights of people, the rights, lives, and livelihoods of people of African descent. So I think it was almost, it was really an external factor, an unfortunate factor, that this man was killed in such a brutal way that pushed the international community to really respond, and the millions of people on the street to really get the UN to react. I think there were other things that impeded also, or that states often say they limited their full implementation, and that was COVID. Of course, that's a big thing to hide behind. COVID is always a big thing to hide behind. It did happen, and it was a big challenge for many developing countries and many Black countries, to be honest. And what was the world's concern is how do we ensure that people don't die? How do we get the medicine to keep people alive? So the world focused on other things came up. For an example, a big hurricane. We had Dorian. So things were happening, and I think the decade and the focus of people of African descent was constantly pushed aside until we had George Floyd. I believe that since we were set up, the forum itself, and with every session we have, we see more and more people engaging. We had, I think in Geneva, this past session was the largest number we've had. We had well over 1,000 people engaging in side events and so forth. So there is an interest, there's an excitement around the permanent forum that I almost, and one of our colleagues, Justin from the US, he often says, this is a movement. And it feels like that, when you're in the room and you see so many thousands of people moving around the city talking about this issue of rights of people of African descent. But I do believe that really those are bits and pieces of what happened in this past decade, but I think a genuine assessment needs to happen. The UN does an assessment, I think in a very sort of almost sterile kind of way. I think we need a genuine assessment, and that assessment has to come from the ground. Have people's lives changed? We're looking at a research right now with, I'm doing a research with University of Dayton to look at how our treaty bodies, UN treaty bodies, are engaging or have engaged in the last 10 years on this issue on the rights of people of African descent, particularly the rights of women. Have they done anything? And even with the UN mechanism, very little mention of people of African descent or mention of women of African descent and their specific concerns and needs. So for me, there needs to be a genuine assessment of what happened to ensure that we have for the next 10 years that's coming up, and we really are hoping for that second decade, that we can have a genuine engagement with people of African descent at a community level and a real impact on their lives, not a sort of a global, let's talk about it in this sort of theoretical kind of way, but a real way. And I think the forum is a good place to start that discussion. I'll end there. Lots more to say, but I'll end there.
Okay, we hope that Dr. Soomer will join us. Yes, Dr. Soomer, you can.
Thank you.
Put your camera on.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay.
Yes, good.
I think that there were a couple more things that happened during the decade that did not make it a complete failure, because I want to go after that to the failures. I think that in certain countries, for example, in Latin America, there are some countries that made an effort to change their census so that there would be a recognition of people of African descent. So we have a situation where now most of the countries went from something like 7% of the population identifying as people of African descent to more than 30%. And in the case of Brazil, to almost 60% of the people identifying as people of African descent. So you see this growing awareness within these countries. And when you go to Latin America now and you see the movement of people of African descent, you recognize that they are being given a voice. And I think that is a major success for countries that almost denied, like Argentina denies up to this day that it has people of African descent, because we know what happened in Argentina. And we can see that there were some UN programs with regard to putting out information on enslavement. And so, for example, like UNESCO, putting out some better information to correct the records that we had before. And so there is minimal that we can point to with regard to success. Of course, I laud that the permanent forum was established, but the forum was established without the resources that would make it effective. Thanks to the commitment of the members of the forum, as well as a hardworking secretariat, our sessions have just attracted and blown their imagination, because they didn't think we'd be able to do what we have done in the short space of time, and without the resources. So yes, and of course there has also, the decade has not ended, and so you also had the day for people of African descent, and now you have a day for women of African descent.
Yes.
So I think that these are achievements within the decade that we can look at. But there are major failures. And so the first one that comes to mind, of course, is the non-recognition and non-support by leading world nations with regard to the decade. So you don't see anything happening, especially in the former colonial countries and the existing colonial countries. So nothing was done, no recognition, no support, etc. In fact, you started to see the reverse. You start to see the emergence of the right, and the right winning elections in these countries. So you see a backlash with regard to what we are trying to do and achieve as people of African descent. So white right-wing people are now taking over these countries again.
White nationalists.
And you can be sure that they're not going to recognize and support another decade. You also see it's a failure because you still see persistent systemic racism and discrimination. You can see it, of course, with the fact that with migration, our bodies were before in the Atlantic and Caribbean Sea. Now it's in the Mediterranean. You can see it with regard to structural inequalities that continue with education, employment, healthcare, the justice system, etc. And so you see the entrenchment of structural racism. You do not see an attempt to address economic empowerment of people of African descent. Yes, within the permanent forum and within the reparations commission that the CARICOM set up, you had the conversations about transformation and building generational wealth, etc. But you continue to see that there is no support for people of African descent when it comes to economic empowerment. So the failures are countless. And you also see a backlash with regard to our cultural heritage, even from within, that we do not promote our cultural diversity, and that our cultures continue to be either invisible or expunged. I mean, you've seen it in the United States with our books written by people of African descent, anything to do with our heritage. You continue to see underrepresentation in these countries at the political level. We don't really think about it because we're from a Caribbean where most of our people look like us, but we do not see that being addressed at the political level in these countries. And educational inequalities continue. You see the reversal of affirmative action. You continue to see the health disparities and the chronic diseases. You saw it during COVID-19, the fact that we could not get vaccines, etc. So if it wasn't for Africa, the COVID-19 probably would have had a greater impact on us. And you also see that we continue to be impacted disproportionately with regard to climate justice and the growing environmental inequality that people of African descent and people on the continent, because Africa is feeling the impact of climate change and so on. And of course, they continue to sideline the Durban Declaration. A lot of them have not signed on to the Durban Declaration, which is the foundation of the Permanent Forum.
What we do.
You know, and so all of these issues are very relevant because of the failure of the first decade. They have to be brought forward toward the second decade, a decade that was very well articulated, but I think did not have the mechanism to monitor and evaluate. The mechanism should have been the Permanent Forum, but the Permanent Forum was formed 2 years before the end of the decade. So we could not have, reports, etc., or ask for reports from governments with regard to what they were doing with regard to reversing the racism that has been so entrenched in their countries. And so we are calling for the second decade, not only because we want to see reparatory justice on the agenda, but we want to see genuine transformation on the agenda.
Yes. Definitely.
Yes, so all eyes will be on the Permanent Forum, and Shabaka was at the inaugural session. So over to you, Shabaka. I know your heart and your spirit is in the forum. It's not just, a matter of being a host on the program, but you were in fact one of the inaugural attendees at that particular forum. So over to you, my brother. Over to you.
Yeah, what I want to do is to sort of just add just elaborate a little bit on some of the points that both Dr. Curry and Dr. Soomer have already made, coming from the perspective of the civil society. I just came out, this is why I was a little bit late for the program tonight, of a meeting of a new platform of indigenous and African people across the Americas, which has representation in both the Permanent Forum for African people and for indigenous people. And what I would say is that when people look at the first decade and they say, and they look at it from the point of view of all the negative, I think you should focus on governments. Governments, as Dr. Soomer said, both the former colonial powers and the formerly colonized, the governments tended to try to stay away for different reasons. But that decade energized civil society all across the Americas. You now have powerful civil society organizations in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Panama, in Belize, in Colombia, and so on, that have all taken energy and gotten direction and inspiration from just the articulation of the decade and the material. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Dr. What's her name from Jamaica had a lot to do with the
Marine Shepherd.
Marine Shepherd, in terms of the way that the decade was articulated. That in itself energized civil society all across the Americas. So when we talk about from the perspective of the NGOs, we're talking about a different place that we're in today than where we were 10 years ago. So I want to thank all those who are responsible for doing it. I sometimes, as African people, we don't really realize how far behind we are. When we were growing up, we always thought of the struggle for African people as an orphan. Any other struggle you were involved in, everybody was willing to embrace you. It was a righteous cause. But the struggle for racial justice for people of African descent has always been a kind of orphan. Nobody's wanted to take it up. Nobody's supported it. Nobody's celebrated it. So the idea that the highest governing body in the world, multilateral body, was ready to give some credence to this struggle, and it was articulated so clearly and forcefully, really gave inspiration to civil society. And I think that's going to bear a lot of fruit coming down the road.
I certainly agree with you.
I agree completely.
Because the Permanent Forum is the body which is set up to engage with civil society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Civil society didn't have that voice before.
Yeah, on that platform, that created a platform that did not exist. And as we said, other mechanisms existed, CERD and others. They're very specific and they're country specific and they're sort of intergovernmental. So there wasn't this sort of focus, a platform where you can have civil society organizations coming to speak. And I just want to say, Shabaka, I see you promoted me to doctor. I appreciate the
Well, I know you as a
the
teacher.
kind gesture, but the doctor
She's
on the
just a
call is
step
Dr.
away. She's
Zuma.
just a step away.
Lecturer. All right.
She's just
Professor,
a
yeah.
step away.
Professor. Right.
Yeah, but Shabaka raised an important distinction in terms of I also don't accept the fact that it was failure. So I want to recognize your
Success.
analysis that you have a two-pronged perspective, one in terms of government, one in terms of civil society. And in terms of civil society, definitely they were activated, inspired, motivated, fired up, to do so much that was done. But in terms of government and next decade, because this decade is almost closed, so whatever is happening will continue happening, I guess. But I wonder if the term people of African descent means something different to the diaspora than to people on the continent. What I want to ask is whether the African Union sees itself as part of this people of African descent, or whether the African Union sees itself as an organization as obligated to to support the agenda of the diaspora, because the diaspora is officially the sixth region of the African Union. How does that fit in the overall scheme of things with respect to the current decade and the next decade going forward?
Before everybody answers, let me just say that this question was raised at the inaugural meeting, and I am not aware that there was a definitive answer. But let's hear what our two guests have to say.
Yes, Dr. Soomer.
Yes, I can start. But before I respond to that question, I didn't finish a thought that I had. With regard to the question on civil society as opposed to governments. I think one of the things that I have really appreciated on behalf of the forum, because I have been engaging in all of these countries that you mentioned as the chair, one of the things I really appreciate about these engagements of civil society is the specificity of region that comes now to the forum. So we understand our mandate not simply as the collective, but also at the individual and country level. And that understanding is going to augur very well for the permanent forum in the future. So I am very appreciative of that. But to go back to the engagement with the African Union, I will honestly tell you that it has been difficult. Because a forum, even within the forum itself, we are having the discussion.
Yeah.
A forum that is established for people of African descent has created a kind of tension between people who live in Africa and people of African descent. Yeah. So do you have to now leave the continent to get our attention as a forum for people of African descent? My own thinking and philosophy on it is that there are no people of African descent without Africa. And so we have to find a nexus. And that is the reason why we have 3 African people from the continent on the permanent forum. We have someone from Cameroon, someone from Egypt, and someone from Kenya on the permanent forum. So we already have the engagement. It's how we deepen the engagement. We have not been happy, I can tell you, at the level of the permanent forum with the number of countries from the AU who participate in the sessions. We would like to see more. And so what we are doing at the forum is not waiting for them to come to us, but for us to go to them. And one of the major steps that they have taken, and I think it was a tremendous step, is the hosting of the Reparations Conference in Ghana last year, November, where the entire AU came together to host that conference in Ghana. And I thought it was a tremendous gesture on their part. The fact that they have challenges with the year of return is not to say that there's not a genuineness, but we are doing it for the first time and we will make mistakes. We do not afford ourselves mistakes, and I don't understand why. But we have had people who have repatriated themselves now for decades. I had a meeting with a group that lives there, and yes, they face challenges, but they are very happy to be back on the continent. So what we have to do now is to assist in creating the spaces, creating the dialogues, because I think one of the things we don't realize is that Africa is still hurting from the trauma of
The
enslavement.
trauma is there too.
We think that it is only in the Caribbean and in the Americas. Africa has been accused of selling its children. And so that trauma they must deal with. And the only way we can deal with it, I keep telling people, is to have the big people conversations with the diaspora and with the continent for us to understand, because that theory has been debunked in many ways, but people hold on to it because, I mean, we have other countries. For example, there were Jews involved in the Holocaust. Nobody says that. But now that we are asking for reparations, they say to Africa, why don't you pay reparations first? So Africa finds itself backing away, you know. And I think that we can help Africa to heal as the diaspora. So at the Permanent Forum, we are trying to engage more deeply. We have been invited to some of the meetings, you know, that are happening. I'm very much in touch one-on-one with them. They also, Gaynel said we had a meeting in Barbados, and that was because we had a group of jurists from Africa who came to the Caribbean to speak to us in Barbados on how they can assist us with moving the reparations movement forward in Africa as well as globally. And now they have now invited a set of jurists from the Caribbean to come to Africa for them to start working on a plan. So yes, it has not been easy, but we start to see the strides, and we are starting to see Africa also reaching out to us with the forum. We would like to see them a little more involved. We would like to see not just the governments, but the African private sector more
society.
involved with us as a permanent forum, because the things we're trying to do with regard to removing systemic racism, with to give us opportunities to build generational wealth, will not just be a governmental thing, it will also be a private sector thing. And so we want to see them more involved with us. So it's not an easy question to answer, but I think we're seeing progress.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just add that I think it's important just to recognize this, to build on that trauma issue, that, you know, it is so important for us to understand. When I tell my students about this issue, I always give them the example of, what if you send your son, I don't know, to the shop, he's 12, you send him for bread or whatever, and you never see him again. How do you feel? What do you think will happen? What would be the feeling? Imagine that happening millions of times over. The feeling of loss, I think, was there, and the trauma was there. And then to add to that is the whole accusation that it is your fault. You did it, and you should therefore pay. So I think we have to have a very, as June said, a mature conversation with our African brothers and sisters about this issue, and to have a conversation about how are we going to heal on both sides of the Atlantic. I think it's really, really important.
Yes, the healing is important for us.
Okay, we missed the opportunity to say good night to our listeners on Talk City 91.1. Normally they leave us at 9 o'clock, so in the absence, good night to our listeners on 91.1. Could we take a final comment from each one of our guests, or is there something that one of the hosts would like to say before we do that?
Yes, well, I just want to put this thing into some kind of broader context. The conversation that we're having now in terms of African descent, and if it includes, who it is includes and who is excluded and so on, is a broader conversation about vocabulary and language that we are challenged with coming out of a colonial experience. So, for example, we started the show by talking about indigenous people excluding people from Africa, when the word indigenous simply means those people who colonists or colonizers would meet in their own locality, and therefore indigenous really should come with a word before it. It should have it should be describing something. It should be indigenous American, indigenous African, indigenous Indian, indigenous, etc. But the word indigenous has become locked into the indigenous Americans. And so sometimes when we're talking in terms of policy and we're talking about indigenous people, we ignore the fact that you have indigenous people all over the world who've been impacted by colonialism the same way. When we talk about language again, Black, right? The organization that I'm in, that I was just in a meeting with, it was called the Black and Indigenous Liberation Movement. The Africans in that organization had a huge protest about a year ago about the naming, the use of the term Black in the organization. Why would you use the word indigenous to describe the Native Americans and then Black, when Black could really be a term that is used for all people who have, again, experienced second-class citizenship in the context of a colonial experience? So, I mean, we're coming from a place where just a few years ago in Trinidad, across the Caribbean, we were fond of the word Negro. And we're still trying to purge ourselves of Negro and Negress. So language is part of the decolonizing process. And it's something that we're going to have to continue to refine until we get it right. So as far as I understand, people of African descent in terms of the Permanent Forum would extend to everybody who is either from the continent, indigenous to the continent, and who is part of the diaspora of the continent. But of course, it can be confusing, and it's something again we're going to have to continue to discuss and refine as we go along. It's not an easy place for us to be here right now at this time.
Yes, but we do need to have the closing remarks from the guests, and this was a beautiful session this evening, and hopefully we would see them back not too long into the future. Dr. Soomer, you want to go first? Closing remarks?
Well, let me say thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this program again. It's always a pleasure to come on this program. I am happy to add 2 inches to anybody.
That's to me too. 2 inches. To
but
me too.
I want to say that the Permanent Forum is very happy to be invited into spaces like this.
Yeah.
It's not easy for us to get into these spaces. And so when you invite us to come in, it's always our honor to do so and to come and share with you some of the things that we are doing. We are doing many things. We are doing many, many things. And right now, one of the things that we are doing is launching a logo competition. We are a very young institution. We have only had 3 sessions. And so we are trying to find our identity and to build that identity. So we have just launched a program, and we want you to participate, as many people, listeners, as possible. Go on our website and you find all of the details. And also, I would like to also continue to invite you to join the sessions. Last April in Geneva was tremendous. Young people of African descent descended on Geneva. Out of the almost 2,000 people we had, more than 80% were young people below the age of 30. And so we want to continue to engage, especially with the youth, and to look at the issues around intersectionality that we spoke about earlier, whether it be women of African descent, children of African descent, older people, etc. Let us look at all of the intersections, because all of us together will make a difference. Thank you.
Curry?
Yes, I would just say thank you. I won't prolong it, but I will also want to tell you that I would encourage you to start thinking about our session in New York next year. It's in April, the 14th to the 17th.
We are still hoping it will not be in New York, that it will be on the
But
continent.
yeah,
We are
it
still
might, we
hoping.
might, we're hopeful, but start planning for those dates anyway, around April, mid-April. If we're lucky, we can get to the continent, but if not, we'll have it in New York. I know having worked for the UN, I understand how high the walls of the UN can be. And it would be wonderful if we can go to communities and to have that discussion in Africa or another community. What we're looking for all the time is financial support, because we have very little. I often say that if you don't fund it, you're not really that committed to it. So I argue with my UN colleagues a lot that, you're not really serious if you're giving us one staff and no real budget. But that's a discussion for another day. Just to say thank you again for the opportunity. I loved speaking with all of you, and please do invite us again. And I look forward to continuing the good work with all of you and with civil society across the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too for that stimulating discussion that we had, and thank you very much, and hope to see you soon. Kwame, you know the usual roundup. I can't even see who is on tonight because I'm on my phone. So I'm depending on you to let us know who are with us on this program. Take it over and close the program for us.
Sure. Thank you so much. It'll be my pleasure. I'll start with Ras Jamiki out of the Bahamas. He's talking about the fact that he thinks that the diaspora really needs to see itself as the sixth region of Africa, and react as a part of Africa and not just as people of African descent, but to look at it through the lens of equality within the AU. I guess he's alluding to the fact that while we are named the sixth region, we are not an equal region. We don't have the headquarters. We don't have the voting rights. We certainly don't have the diplomats in the AU. So as of now, it is a lip service sixth region, another real sixth region. Princess Aina out of Burkina Faso, very pleasant good night to you, Your Highness. Always a pleasure. She made several points on tonight, and one of them has to do with the fact that, yes, absolutely, there are psychological fractures, as it were, and factors that need to be taken into consideration within the narrative as part of the healing. And she's talking about Babylon works to make us fight against one another. Liberia, Sierra Leone, unity is the key. We have to heal and support each other. The point is being made. The question is being asked by one Lieutenant JC. How can we make this more effective? A very important question. But a statement was made by the same individual. In my view, they say it seems the AU is becoming or has become irrelevant or not very effective whatsoever these past decades to people of African descent or African peoples everywhere. Our very own local Akila Jaramogi. So a very pleasant good evening to you and the American community. You were cheering Shabaka on when he was talking about the civil society encouragement and engagement and how you have been certainly energized by this process. You made the point, brothers and sisters, there is so much more work to be done. Our people are still traumatized. I agree. Confused and lost. Crime, mental health issues, food security, drugs, miseducation, self-hate, and more. How can we address these problems that relates directly to our people of African descent? Very powerful question. Hopefully we can have you on sometime to unpack that issue, to deal with that issue. Our image brings greetings and says that the decade is a tool, but we must learn how to use this tool in the struggle. Of course, out of Ayanola Bongo Wisely, Ayanola aka St. Lucia for those who don't know the local term, he's bringing grand rising. Indaba family, love and blessings, Ambassador Soomer. Of course, Ambassador Soomer is from Ayanola, so there was a Ayanola kind of fist bump going on there in the chat. And a very important question from Princess Aina, I think is worthy of mentioning. We have a couple more left, and she asks a question: how the UN can lead justice as they are the driver of that marketing of murder. Very strong words coming from the princess there. What about the demographic dividend? Now, after 25 years of ODD implementation, the UN days that only 70, well, says that only 70% has been done. So 25 years after ODD, speaking to demographic dividend, there's only a 17% implementation. Really, what's up with that with regards to the question? Of course, greetings being brought by way of others. Dan Man out of Jamaica. We also have as well Deborah E. Walters out of Connecticut. And that ends the roundup for tonight. My own personal statement before we close out, before I bid everyone good night, is that right around the corner, we have to deal with the whole issue of affirmative action, which is a present tense issue, having been reversed. We have to deal with the issue of a potential Trump term. We have to deal with then a potential Project 25 agenda, which is a white nationalist agenda. Never mind that there are some black conservatives who are supporting that agenda. Go figure. I would love to understand how and why they take that position. But there are a number of things that are, you spoke about the white nationalists earlier on tonight, Brother Shabaka, as well as our lovely host, and the work that they have been engaging in a kind of a spite, in a kind of a backlash. So among the failures is the fact that while in some pockets there is some change and civil society energizing and engagement, in places where Africans are still a minority, we have a lot of aggression and hostility taking place, and these issues need to be dealt with. And I would love to see how it's dealt with through the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And I would certainly love to see what would happen in terms of Black-led nations where our demographics are either equal or more than that of 50% of the population. How will those governments fare? Because there will not be an excuse of a white nationalist government in place. You are the black government in charge, yet many of them have done nothing. Well, we are out of time, but not out of love, certainly not out of words nor faith, for this edition of Indaba, Wednesday, the 4th of September, 2024. Only our third edition in this new installment, this new season. We look forward to you, same time, same place, by way of Facebook, by way of YouTube, and certainly by way of 91.1 FM. If you have not done so, smash a like on that button. Maybe you're on Facebook, so you can give a love. I would love a love. If you're on YouTube, you can give a like. Please be sure to share and absolutely leave a comment letting us know what are your thoughts. Remember, next time you are with us, you can send us a voice note. So in addition to doing a text and a comment, you can now allow your beautiful African voices to be heard on Indaba. It's only 30 seconds long, but you can do a lot in 30 seconds, I promise you. Again, not out of love, faith, or words, but out of time, I want to say a very pleasant good night to our radio co-host on tonight, Baba Fergus. Again, another powerful Africa report, and Brother Shabaka Kambon, always in the know, always active, always coming from some very important issue. You and I need to catch up. I've been trying to get you to have a meeting with your brother for a time now, but it's been tough going. I don't know. I got to book an appointment for my brother. But again, a very pleasant good night to one and all. See you next time on another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows. Very pleasant good night.